This is the Chucktown Wind Report, extended weekday outlook from Monday, October the 12th, and we'll carry this on through Friday, October the 16th. Okay, so we're looking at the water vapor imagery loop for the Northern Hemisphere, specifically continental United States. I wanted to show a couple things for a pattern for this week as we dive down into our local beat. Right now we have this upper level low off of our coastline that you can see some clouding up in the sky. If we look to the east and to the northeast, you probably see some of that cloud texturing going on. Might make for some decent sunset pictures tonight, but I'm not expecting any precipitation with this as it heads off to the east-northeast. Our next player is going to be this upper level low moving across the Great Lakes. It is occluding, so that means cold fronts are overtaking warm fronts, or it's basically in the process of removing warm air from it as it swoops down over the Great Lakes and heads off to the northeast. What this does is it drags a very weak and dry cold front below it. We do have a lot of dry air ahead of it along the eastern half of the United States as this jet stream dives down. We'll get into that in just a moment, but either way, this weak cold front I'm expecting to pass through tomorrow night in the early hours, early morning hours. It may get hung up on the Appalachian Mountains tomorrow afternoon, and then it'll press through rather quickly tomorrow night. The big question is going to be about these southerly winds ahead of this cold front. As it approaches in the southeast, we end up getting this zonal flow ahead of it. So that's going to be the question: are the winds going to come up? And that's going to lie in whether or not marine layering is going to have an effect on it. So our shelf waters have cooled significantly by several degrees. We're down in the low to very almost mid 70s for water temperatures, and that tends to stabilize the surface of the water, especially with warmer air masses. So that's another factor, is how warmer the air temperature is going to be. Okay, if we look at our NOAA water vapor imagery, we see just how dry this air is ahead of this cold front. So it's a very weak cold front right here, upper level low over the Great Lakes, and then we have more air diving down. This is going to be our jet stream pattern from pretty much the week. We have a negatively tilted jet stream that dips down through the United States, and it's going to stay that way all the way through Friday. So we have this sort of cooler but mild air driving down into the southeast region and then kind of swooping up. So typically this time of the year when we see this pattern, we see cooler air, bits and pieces at a time, diving down one after the other. So high pressures with low pressures going across the Great Lakes and driving cold fronts through. The cold fronts tend to weaken, become drier, and then the cooler high pressures dive down along this kind of jet stream, where you see this subtropical jet being suppressed in a positive slope down here to the south as this jet stream keeps it at bay down into the Midwest. So that keeps the moisture from training up across the Gulf along those cold fronts. Okay, so I know that was quite a bit. If we look at our numerical models, here's what I was talking about with the jet stream, and you see this negative dip kind of driving down into the southeast region just like this. This is the Euro model, and here's the upper level low this way. This is our subtropical jet being contained, and this is our polar jet is starting up this time of the year. So what we're seeing is a swoop up this way. Okay, that is the Euro model, and let me flip to the GFS as well for the same thing, and what we're seeing is very similar. They're both in agreement for tomorrow for this kind of a pattern to occur, and this goes on all the way through the week. So even if we look at 120 hours from now, we still see this dip heading down, and that's going to be the pattern for the next 5 to 7 days. That's why the chance of precipitation is very, very low. Okay, if we look at our jet stream now, here we have this slight dip just below that low pressure up over the Great Lakes, and then if we keep going forward in time, you can see this trend develop where you see this slope. This is for Friday, and then as we get into Saturday, and then by 12 p.m. Saturday, we see that dip start to sharpen. That's called a Rossby wave, and this is when I think we're going to start seeing some much cooler air settle down into the southeast region, and you can see this dive going on right here, that jet streaking happening and then curving around. This is going to be something we may feel by Sunday. We may see our temperatures drop significantly into more of a fall-like pattern. So we're talking about 40s for lows and maybe upper 50s to low 60s for highs. So that's something to keep an eye on as well this time of the year. That will also bring water temperatures down. Looking at our numerical predictions, here is our map for Saturday, October the 17th. This is the Euro model explaining or basically indicating that there's a cool air mass dropping down, and you can see how it is here. This is the northerly winds driving down into the southeast around high pressure here. It's actually the center of high pressure would be here, and then these northerly winds would be coming down around it behind a next cold front that's slated to be here by Friday. Another weak dry cold front coming by Friday will press through quickly, and then we get this cold shot of air. So if we look at, let's see, I want to go over to our GFS and see what they're saying in agreement or disagreement with 132 hours out. So that brings it to Sunday at 12 a.m. Very same setup with driving northerly cool air. That's getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, but I'm just wanting to let you know that possibly this weekend we're going to swing into full fall mode, and that will drive our air temperatures down. Okay, looking at sea surface temperatures, here's what we have going on. This loop is actually run. Let me find the date here. I think I ran this one from September the 28th. Yes, that'd be correct. September the 28th, and this runs all the way through present time, and you can see the water starting to cool off significantly along our shelf. Now, this area right here always cools down faster because it's shallower. Out here over the Gulf Stream, we have this surface flow that happens in this direction and goes up the coastline. So the Gulf Stream always stays warmer. That will continue to stay in the mid to upper 70s even through the winter time, as this river of warmer surface air, surface water continues to remain. But along the shoreline, we see our waters drop significantly. This causes what's called marine layering, and marine layering, the cooler the waters, the more stable the water. So if we have a warmer air mass over the top of the water, it creates sort of a thin haze or a fog. That is a stable layer versus unstable, which helps winds come up. So unstable air able to mix to the surface along warmer waters creates more wind. When we get cooler waters, the wider the spread in air temperature and water temperature, the harder it is for that surface mix to occur. Okay, so we're talking about 71 to 74 degrees in these waters. All right, looking at our local data scope, here's where we get into our local very mild default sea breeze going on right at the moment. We have 6 knots at Isle of Palms Pier. We have a slight west-northwesterly flow. That's probably in association with some of those residual northerlies that are still burning off. We see northerlies here at the Peninsula Charleston, and even over here at our Hurricane Network station, some residual northerlies, whereas our sea breeze front, a very mild sea breeze front, has developed right along the coastline. That's very typical when the wind pattern drops below 5 to 6 knots from any direction, especially from a northerly direction. Our sea breeze tends to come ashore in a very mild way, and that's just the interaction between ocean and land. So you have this cooler air mass over the water migrating into the warmer land, and that is our sea breeze front. So we'll continue to see this pattern through tomorrow. The big question is going to be whether or not we have a moderate southerly flow. So I want to look at our sea surface temperatures that we have for Datascope, and in particular we're showing about 71 degrees for our area. Now the tidal fluxing, when the water heads inland, let me deactivate that. I think we get the point on the sea surface temperatures. Okay, so as water goes in, the cooler water heads in through these coastal breaks, and the tide comes up. This cooler water coming in between the land masses, it cools, but as it sits inland and reaches peak capacities, this is warmer, shallower water, and it warms. So what we end up with is some of this warm water heading back out on the outgoing tide, on the ebb, and you get warm water plumage in the harbor, and even warm water plumage out along the beaches and some of these other areas where the coastal breaks are. And so these pockets of warmer water may allow for those winds to come up in those areas. If the water is cooler overall and the air temperature is much higher, we'll get a very thick fog layer right along the beaches, and it sort of just hovers right over these land masses. Now, behind the landmass, if we get a southwest wind, this gets kind of tricky, because if we have a curtain of fog along the beaches, sometimes behind these land masses where you have drier, unstable air and the wind is coming over it across the harbor, you see these winds actually come up. So right just inland of the harbor mouth and inland everywhere else, we may see winds that are much stronger than what we see at the beach. We could continue to see 6 knots at the beach, and we could have 14 knots in the harbor, and that's why sometimes we get those kind of readings when we have marine layering events starting up. Now, tomorrow's air temperatures are expected to be around 80 to 81 degrees. Let me see if I can capture that here. Get an expectation of what our air temperatures are going to be for tomorrow. Okay, and here we go. So we're going to move into Tuesday, and we're looking at upper 70s to near 80. So if our water temperature is staying down in the low to mid 70s and our air temperature does not get that much higher, if it doesn't go up into the 80s, then we have a better chance of a surface mix as those two temperatures even out, and we don't have as much marine layering. So it's going to be kind of iffy. Now our models for this, I'll go to the winds. Let me show all models and let these load for just a minute. This is where things get really tricky with marine layering this time of the year, when the models are all, some of these models show this high build, and you can see even our high resolution model, the lime green, which is the North American model 5 kilometer, is showing a higher build working into the mid-teens. So it doesn't mean it won't happen. It just means that models are starting to come into agreement on a southwest flow, meaning mid and even possible upper teens tomorrow afternoon ahead of that cold front. Whereas the one I'm going to be watching tomorrow morning is going to be this red one. That's the HRRR, or the High Resolution Rapid Refresh 3 kilometer model. It only goes out 12 hours, so by the time we wake up in the morning, it should have some values populated for the day. And I'm going to be very interested to see what that one says. But I'm going to err on the side of caution. I'm going to call for 9 to 13 knots tomorrow, just based on that criteria. And if we are lucky and those temperatures even out a little bit more, we may get a stronger build ahead of that weaker cold front. We could see 13 to 17 knots, but I'm leaning on the 9 to 13 knots with a cap around 13. May see some ups and downs and pulses as that wind struggles to get higher along the beaches, but I think the harbor and inland values will meet these standards from these models. So the Charleston Harbor could easily see 13 to 17 knots, whereas the beaches are going to be very, very iffy. Okay, so as we get into Wednesday, we see high pressure. Let me go to our surface map here. Okay. Once again, here is our coastline. If we see this cold front dropping down into the southeast region, you can see there's not a lot of moisture involved with this, and that's going to continue to taper off where we don't see anything but maybe a trace of rain into tomorrow night. Now, this high pressure driving down in behind this cold front will move in this general direction, so by Wednesday we could see westerly winds or northwesterly winds driving down across the coastline, and especially along that jet stream pattern that I showed earlier. And then as this center of high pressure moves to the north, then we could see sort of a northerly build down into South Carolina for Wednesday evening, and even into Thursday we may get a cold shot of northerlies as it moves back off the coast. Now if we look a little bit further ahead in time, we get into Thursday and Friday, we see another low. This will drive across the United States. It will join this segment of frontal boundary here, will become something very similar to this and draw another frontal boundary very similar to the one that we're looking at now for Friday. And we'll have another frontal boundary lineup that'll pass through even quicker than this one, and then a very strong high pressure ridge building in behind that. So that's what may be causing our air temperatures to drop significantly for this weekend. So as far as winds, let's do a recap on winds. So for today we see these mild southerlies along that default sea breeze. As we get into tomorrow ahead of this cold front, we have this high pressure down in the Gulf providing this westerly flow. The cold front here, we see a southwesterly flow develop ahead of it. We're looking at 9 to 13 knots, erring on the side of caution, but there is a possibility we could see 13 to 17 knots break through on the beaches. If not, we'll likely see that in the harbor. Now as we get into Wednesday, you see this high pressure drive down. We'll see westerly winds. We could see a tightened gradient here and there bring us 10 to 14 knots. And then as the day goes on, we'll see that wind sort of bend over to the north as central high pressure lines up just over the Appalachian Mountains. And then as it slides in through the southeast region behind the cold front moving into the Atlantic, we'll see a northerly bite on Thursday, slowly fade into northeast flow. And then as we get into Friday, that's when that next cold front's coming. And then we could see a cold northeast blast over the weekend with much cooler air behind it. Okay, so that will do it for the Chucktown Wind Report. Thanks for watching.